learned a lot about using Cypress in the last 13 weeks. We learned how to create a test, how to add assertions, how to create Cypress commands, how to locate elements, how to create before and after hooks, and how to run our tests from the command line. Let's do a review of some of the key concepts we've learned. In Lesson 1, we learned the command to install Cypress as a development package in our project. That was the command npm install cypress -- save dev. We also learned the command to open the Cypress UI tool, which was npx cypress open. In Lesson 2, we learned about the files where our test configurations are stored and where we can create custom commands. Configurations are stored in cypress.config.js, and the custom commands are stored in commands.js. In Lesson 5, we learned the command to get an element with the ID of email using cy.get. We also learned the command to get an element with the ID of password, and we learned how to chain the type command onto it so that we could type into the password field. We also learned how to find a button with the ID of submit and how to chain the request to click it. In Lesson 6, we learned an easy way to create a random number between 1 and 1,000, which is very useful when you are creating test automation data. We learned how to do an assertion. This particular assertion gets the last name field by ID and then asserts that the last name is user, because that was our user's last name. In Lesson 8, we created a reusable login command in the commands.js file that we could use in all of our tests. In Lesson 11, we learned 6 different ways to find an element. First, we learned how to find an element by ID. Then we learned how to find an element by type. In this case, the type was equal to password. Then we learned how to find an element by text. In this case, we use the contains command. So we were looking for an element that contained the word submit. We learned how to find an element by class. In this case, we were looking for an element in the logout class. We learned how to find an element by CSS locator. In this case, the CSS locator we were looking for was input, and we were looking for the first locator. We also learned how to find an element by data automation ID. If we had an element that we had assigned a data automation ID like this, then we would be able to use it in our tests. We learned how to create a before each method, which would be code that would run before every test in the test class. And we learned how to create an after each method, which would be a method that runs after every test in the test class. We learned how to run our Cypress tests headlessly, meaning without the browser, by using the command npx cypress run. And we learned how to create a special config file, which could be used when you were testing in a QA environment as opposed to a production environment, and how to call that config file in your Cypress run command. So what are some next steps that you can take now that you have started to learn test automation? One thing you could do is read through the Cypress documentation to learn about all kinds of great Cypress features that we didn't cover in these lessons. The Cypress documentation is really well organized and has a lot of examples. You could try creating a Cypress project for your company's code. Now that you know how to create a new project or how to add Cypress to an existing project, this would be a great way to start. You could learn how to automate API tests in Cypress. API testing is extremely useful because those tests are faster and more reliable than UI tests. If you don't know how to do API testing, you may want to consider taking my course, Postman Essential Training, which is offered through LinkedIn Learning. It teaches you about the basics of how to make an API call, and how to create an API assertion. You could also set up continuous integration for your tests once your Cypress tests are up and running. And the Cypress documentation provides instructions about how to do that. Or you could try learning a different automation framework. Some good suggestions might be Selenium WebDriver or Playwright. This is the final episode of Monday Morning Automation, at least for now. If you've been watching the series from the beginning, you've come a long way. You've learned how to use the command line, how to create and use a Git repository. You've learned the basics of Node.js and JavaScript. And now you've learned how to create UI test automation with Cypress. I hope that you are very proud of everything you've learned and that you use your new skills with confidence. Thanks for watching.